My name is Evelyn Hammond. I was 34 years old the night my life split cleanly into a before and an after. Before that night, I still believed, naively, that a mother's love might be flawed but never cruel, that favoritism could sting but it wouldn't destroy. I was wrong. I grew up in a house where my younger brother Daniel was treated like a promise the world had made to my mother. He was charming, restless, full of potential. Everything he did was framed as temporary, his mistakes, his failures, his recklessness. I was 3 years older, quieter, reliable, the kind of child adults stop worrying about because she never causes problems. When my father Victor left, I was 13 and Daniel was 10. I still remember my mother standing in the doorway that night, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching him pack his things. She didn't cry for me. She didn't ask how I felt. Her eyes were locked on my brother, who clung to her like the ground had vanished beneath him. After that, everything revolved around Daniel. Summer programs we couldn't afford, tuition extensions, excuses stacked on top of excuses. Meanwhile, I learned early that praise was scarce and survival was expected. I didn't resent it, not at first. I adapted. I worked hard. I became self-sufficient because no one was going to catch me if I fell. By 34, I had a steady job as a dental hygienist at Riverside Family Dentistry. Good benefits, predictable hours, a life built on stability, because chaos had been my childhood. Daniel was 24 and still finding himself. 6 years into a communications degree, he'd changed more times than I could count. My mother paid for it all, borrowing money, making promises, insisting he just needed time. The trouble started on a Friday night in September. I'd worked double shifts covering for a sick coworker and came home exhausted around 10:30 p.m. Daniel was waiting by the door, keys already in his hand, bouncing on his heels like a child asking permission. "My car's in the shop," he said, "just brakes. Can I borrow yours?" "Where are you going?" I asked. "Just meeting some people from class. I'll be back by 1. I hesitated. Something in his eyes, too eager, too unfocused, but I was bone tired. Fighting felt like more effort than I had. I tossed him the keys and went straight to bed. At 3:40 a.m., pounding on the door jolted me awake. I came downstairs to find my mother standing stiffly in the living room, flanked by 2 police officers. "We're looking for Evelyn Hammond," one of them said. "That's me," I replied, my voice already shaking. "What's going on?" "Your vehicle was involved in a hit and run tonight. A pedestrian was struck. She's in critical condition." The room tilted. "My car?" I whispered. "I wasn't driving. My brother borrowed it." "Is he here?" Daniel emerged from his room, pale and wide-eyed. "I didn't hit anyone," he said quickly. "I swear." The officers exchanged a glance. "Your vehicle was identified by multiple witnesses," one said. "We need both of you to come to the station." At the police station, the truth began to fracture. A woman named Patricia Holloway had been crossing the street just before midnight when my car ran a red light and struck her. The driver didn't stop. She was in a coma. "I wasn't driving," I told the detective over and over. "I was home, asleep." In the next room, I could hear Daniel's voice, uneven, defensive. "I let a guy from the party drive," he said. "I don't even know his name." A lie, I knew instantly. And something colder settled in my chest. By morning, my mother arrived with a lawyer already in tow. She didn't look at me. She went straight to Daniel. And in that moment, watching her place a protective hand on his arm while I sat alone on a plastic chair, I understood something I had spent my whole life refusing to name. This wasn't about truth. It was about choosing him. And for the first time, I wondered what price I was about to pay for being the stronger one. By the time the sun came up, the police station smelled like burnt coffee and stale fear. My mother sat beside Daniel in a small interview room, her hand never leaving his arm. I watched through the glass from the hallway as their lawyer leaned in close, his voice low, protective. No one came to get me. No one asked if I needed water. I might as well have been invisible. When the lawyer finally introduced himself to me, it was almost an afterthought. "My name is Harold Whitman," he said, adjusting his tie. "Your mother retained me to represent the family." The family, singular. But he'd already made his priorities clear. He spoke to Daniel first, then my mother. Only then did he sit across from me, folding his hands as if delivering bad news to a patient. "The prosecution has witnesses," he said. "Traffic camera footage. The vehicle is registered in your name, Miss Hammond." "I wasn't driving," I said. "My brother was." He nodded, but there was no conviction in it. "They don't have definitive proof of who was behind the wheel. That's both good and bad." "Good," I repeated. "Bad because if neither of you cooperates, they can charge you both with leaving the scene and obstruction." I felt my stomach drop. "Charge us both?" My mother finally looked at me then. Her eyes were tired, but resolved. "There's a deal," the lawyer continued. "If one of you confesses, shows remorse, the prosecution will recommend leniency." "And if we don't?" I asked. "They'll pursue maximum penalties." I waited for my mother to say something. Anything. To insist on the truth. She didn't. Daniel shifted in his seat. "I don't remember much," he said. "I was drunk." "You remember enough to know you weren't driving," I snapped. He avoided my eyes. Later that afternoon, after hours of waiting, my mother pulled me aside into a quiet corner of the station. "Evelyn," she said softly, the way she used to when I was a child and she needed something from me. "Listen to me." I crossed my arms. "I'm listening." "Daniel has his whole life ahead of him," she said. "He's young. He has potential. One mistake shouldn't ruin everything." "And me?" I asked. "You're different," she said quickly. "You're stable. You have a career. You're strong." The word hit like a slap. "So you want me to go to prison?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "For something he did." "It wouldn't be forever," she insisted. "A few years, maybe less. You'd survive it. Daniel wouldn't." I stared at her, searching for hesitation, guilt, something maternal. I found none. In that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but irrevocably. They released us pending charges, and the following days blurred together in a haze of panic and disbelief. Daniel moved back into my mother's orbit completely, sleeping at her house, eating her food, absorbing her protection like oxygen. I hired my own attorney. Her name was Rachel Levin, a former prosecutor with sharp eyes and a reputation for being relentless. I paid her retainer with nearly all my savings. After reviewing the case file, she leaned back in her chair. "Your brother is lying," she said flatly. "The question is whether we can prove it." She'd already requested additional footage from nearby businesses. A convenience store 2 blocks from the accident had a camera angled toward the street. When the footage arrived, my heart pounded as we watched it. There was my car, and behind the wheel, clearly visible through the windshield, was Daniel. Alone. Timestamp, 11:52 p.m., 8 minutes before the accident. "This proves it," I said, relief flooding through me. "This proves he was driving." Rachel didn't smile. "It proves he was driving at that location at that time," she corrected. "The prosecution will argue you switched places afterward." "That's insane," I said. "Why would we switch?" "It doesn't have to make sense," she replied. "It just has to create doubt." The preliminary hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. During that time, Daniel's story began to shift. "Maybe Evelyn drove later," he said in one meeting. "Maybe I just thought someone else was driving." "I was home," I said. "You know that." "I don't know anything," he muttered. "I was wasted." My mother stood beside him, nodding. "Memories can be unreliable," she said pointedly. The morning of the hearing, I sat alone on one side of the courtroom. Daniel sat with my mother and Harold Whitman. She wouldn't look at me. The prosecution laid out their case: the registered vehicle, the witnesses, the traffic camera footage of the accident itself, grainy, inconclusive. Then they called my mother to testify. My chest tightened as she took the stand, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. "Mrs. Hammond," the prosecutor said, "what do you remember from the night of September 16th? "I went to bed around 9:30, my mother said. "But before that, I saw Evelyn take the car keys from the hook by the door." Rachel was on her feet instantly. Objection! Mrs. Hammond previously stated she did not see either child after 9:30. The judge turned to my mother. Which statement is accurate? Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I was confused before, she said. I remembered wrong. I definitely saw Evelyn take the keys. Every word felt like a knife. Rachel cross-examined her hard, about favoritism, about finances, about the conversation where she'd asked me to sacrifice myself. I never said that, my mother insisted. You said he had a future, Rachel replied, and that she was strong enough to handle prison. That's not the same thing, my mother said, but it was. During a recess, Daniel approached me in the hallway. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't know what to do. Tell the truth, I said. Mom says if I confess, my life is over. And mine? I asked. He looked away. You're tougher than me. That was when I understood. They had decided together, and I was expendable. The courtroom felt smaller every time I stepped into it, as if the walls were inching closer, quietly conspiring to trap me inside a story I hadn't written. By the third day of hearings, I understood something brutal. Truth didn't automatically win. It had to be dragged into the light, bleeding and battered, while lies strutted in wearing confidence and borrowed authority. My mother sat stiffly behind Daniel, her hands folded in her lap like she was attending church instead of dismantling her daughter's life. She never looked at me, not once. Not when I entered, not when the judge addressed the room, not when my name was spoken like an accusation. The prosecution returned to her testimony with precision, replaying her words as if they were gospel. You saw Evelyn take the keys, the prosecutor repeated. You're certain? Yes, my mother said. I'm certain. I felt the air leave my lungs. Rachel rose slowly, deliberately, like a predator conserving energy. Mrs. Hammond, she said, you gave a statement to police the morning after the incident, correct? Yes. In that statement, you said you went to bed at 9:30 and did not see either of your children afterward. That's correct. And today, under oath, you're saying something different. I remembered more clearly, my mother said. The stress made me forget before. Rachel nodded. Interesting. Let's talk about stress. She paced in front of the jury. Isn't it true that in the days leading up to this hearing, you spoke with your son repeatedly? I speak to my son every day, my mother replied tightly. Rachel didn't miss the tension. In fact, phone records show you spoke to him 23 times in 48 hours. The courtroom stirred. Isn't it also true, Rachel continued, that during those calls, your son discussed what would happen if he were convicted? My mother's jaw tightened. He was scared. And so you decided to protect him. I decided to tell the truth. Rachel stopped pacing. Is it the truth, Mrs. Hammond, or is it the version of events that saves your son? The judge cautioned her, but the question hung there, heavy and unavoidable. Rachel shifted tactics. Let's talk about your children growing up. You paid for Daniel's education, correct? Yes. And Evelyn paid for her own. She didn't need help. Or you didn't think she deserved it. Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Rachel leaned in. Did you ever tell Evelyn that she should take responsibility for this incident to protect her brother? My mother flushed. No. You never told her she was stronger? Silence. You never told her Daniel had a future, and she could survive prison better than he could. My mother swallowed. I said he had potential. And she didn't? I didn't say that, but she didn't have to. A lifetime of choices said it for her. When Rachel finished, my mother stepped down without looking at me. Not even then. During the afternoon session, Daniel took the stand. He looked smaller up there, less confident, like a child caught lying but still hoping someone would intervene. Rachel began gently. You said earlier that you don't remember much from that night because you were intoxicated. Yes, but you told police you let a stranger drive. I think so. You think so? Yes. Rachel clicked a remote. A receipt appeared on the screen. Do you recognize this? Daniel squinted. Maybe. This is a debit transaction from a liquor store, Rachel said. Time-stamped 12:14 a.m., 4 minutes after the accident, 5 miles from the scene. The room went quiet. If you were too drunk to remember who was driving, Rachel asked calmly, how did you manage to drive to a liquor store and purchase more alcohol? Daniel's mouth opened, closed. I I don't remember. The clerk remembers, Rachel said. He said you were agitated, kept looking at the front of the car, said you thought you might have hit an animal. Objection. Overruled. Rachel let the silence stretch. Or, she continued, maybe you hit Patricia Holloway and panicked. Daniel's face drained of color. The prosecution objected again, but the seed had already been planted. Next came the forensic expert. He spoke in measured tones, clinical and precise, as he explained how height markers and camera angles worked. The individual driving the vehicle in the convenience store footage is between 5'7" and 5'9", he concluded. Daniel was 5'8". I was 5'11". Based on physical proportions, the expert said, it is highly unlikely the driver was Evelyn Hammond. The prosecution countered with their own expert, disputing margins, questioning methodology. They emphasized that the car was registered in my name, that I'd given Daniel permission to use it. Ownership implies responsibility, the prosecutor argued. I sat there, hands clenched, wondering how easily responsibility could be twisted into guilt. Then, 4 weeks into the proceedings, everything changed. Patricia Holloway woke up. When Rachel told me, I had to sit down. The courtroom buzzed when her recorded testimony was played. She spoke slowly, carefully, her voice still weak. I saw the car coming, she said. The driver's face was lit by the streetlight. He looked young, mid-20s, dark hair, thin build. He looked terrified when he saw me, but he didn't stop. That description didn't fit me at all. It fit my brother perfectly. The prosecution tried to discredit her memory, citing trauma, but the judge allowed it. The final blow came from the bartender at the lighthouse. He remembered Daniel clearly. He was belligerent, the bartender testified. We cut him off. He kept saying he had to get home, that his sister would kill him if he wrecked the car. I told him to get an Uber. He left alone. Alone. No stranger, no switching drivers. When closing arguments ended, the jury deliberated for 7 hours. I stared at the floor, afraid to hope. When they returned, my heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear the foreperson speak. Not guilty on all charges. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly cried. But the victory was incomplete. The jury deadlocked on Daniel's charges. The prosecution announced they would retry him. My mother sobbed openly as Daniel was led away. She turned to me, eyes blazing. "Are you happy now?" she hissed. "You've destroyed your brother's life." I met her gaze, steady for the first time in my life. "He destroyed his own," I said. She looked away. And in that moment, I knew something else. This wasn't over. Not for him. Not for her. And not for the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. The second trial moved faster. There was no room left for ambiguity, no shelter for half-truths. What had once felt like a tangled mess of he said, she said, finally resolved into a straight line, one my brother could no longer dodge. Daniel sat at the defense table with a different posture this time. His shoulders slumped. The swagger was gone. Even my mother looked diminished, her confidence eroded by the first verdict. She clutched her purse like a life raft, eyes darting between the judge and her son, as if sheer willpower could still bend reality. Rachel didn't waste time. She presented the convenience store footage again, this time paired with the forensic height analysis. Then the bank records. Then the bartender's testimony, now impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Finally, Patricia Holloway took the stand in person. Seeing her walk slowly to the witness chair, supported by a cane, did something to the room. She wasn't a concept anymore. She wasn't an abstract victim. She was a woman with pain etched into every careful step. She looked directly at Daniel when she spoke. "I remember his face," she said quietly. "I remember thinking he was scared, but not enough to stop." That was it. The jury didn't need 7 hours this time. 3. They found Daniel guilty of leaving the scene of an accident and reckless endangerment. 5 years in prison. My mother made a sound then, a broken animal noise, and collapsed into the seat beside him as officers placed him in handcuffs. She clung to his arm until they pulled her away. She turned to me as they led him out. "This is your fault," she sobbed. "If you'd just done what I asked, if I'd gone to prison for him, I finished calmly. She didn't answer, because somewhere, buried beneath her devotion, she knew the truth. Daniel destroyed his own future the moment he chose himself over an innocent life and tried to bury me with him. I thought that would be the end. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, Rachel called me. "The prosecution is charging your mother," she said. Perjury. Obstruction of justice. I felt nothing at first, just a strange, hollow quiet. The evidence was overwhelming. Her original police statement, her sworn testimony, the contradictions, the phone records, 23 calls in 2 days, and then the text messages. Rachel slid them across the table when we met. "Just say you saw Evelyn take the keys. That's all you need to say. She'll be fine. She's always fine." I stared at the words until they blurred. At trial, my mother looked smaller than I remembered, older, exposed. Her lawyer tried to argue confusion, maternal panic, love clouding judgment. But love didn't explain coaching lies. Love didn't explain sacrificing one child to save another. The jury deliberated less than an hour. Guilty. 20 months in prison. 3 years probation. Before sentencing, she begged me in the hallway. "Evelyn, please," she whispered, gripping my sleeve. "I'm your mother." I looked at her, not with anger, not with hatred, but with clarity. "A mother doesn't do what you did," I said. "You made your choice." She served 17 months. When she was released, she moved closer to the prison where Daniel was serving his sentence, visiting every week. Still protecting, still believing. She tried to reach me once, through my aunt. I declined. There was nothing left to say. Patricia Holloway recovered, though she was left with permanent nerve damage in her left leg. I visited her once the trials were over. "Thank you," she said, gripping my hand, "for fighting." "I almost didn't survive," she admitted softly. "Your brother could have killed me." "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry." She shook her head. "You're not responsible for his choices." Neither was I. My life began to move forward. The dental practice promoted me to office manager. The doctors had stood by me through everything, and their loyalty mattered more than they knew. I started dating again, not to fill a void, not to be rescued, but because I was finally ready. His name was Michael Reyes, a high school counselor I met through a mutual friend. He listened, really listened, when I told him the story. "That isn't love," he said simply. "That's favoritism turned cruel." He was right. And for the first time, I built something healthy with someone who didn't ask me to shrink, sacrifice, or disappear. Daniel was released after 4 years. I heard he moved several states away, working restaurant jobs, struggling under the weight of a felony record. The future my mother had destroyed everything to protect never arrived. I didn't feel satisfaction, just confirmation. Protection without accountability doesn't save anyone. It weakens them. My father reached out then. "I always knew," he admitted over coffee. "It's part of why I left. I couldn't watch her destroy you both." We built something cautious, honest, imperfect, but real. I also began volunteering with an organization that helped people wrongfully accused. People without money, without power, without a mother willing to burn the world to save them. Helping them gave my survival meaning. Years later, a letter arrived from Daniel. It was full of excuses, half apologies, fear. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late. Some betrayals change the shape of love forever. And some truths, once revealed, don't need forgiveness to set you free. They just need to be faced. Life didn't snap back into place after the trials ended. It unfolded slowly, cautiously, like a body relearning how to move after a long illness. I had won my freedom, my name, my truth. But there were still nights I woke up convinced I was back in that courtroom, watching my own mother point at me and lie. Healing, I learned, wasn't loud. It didn't come with dramatic closure or tearful reunions. It came in small, ordinary moments that proved I was no longer living in survival mode. Michael stayed. That mattered more than I expected. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer platitudes about forgiveness or family being everything. He listened. He believed me without hesitation. And when I flinched at raised voices or shut down during conflict, he didn't push. He waited. "You don't owe anyone access to you," he told me once, when I admitted I felt guilty for cutting my mother off completely. Especially people who proved they'd destroy you to protect themselves. That sentence settled somewhere deep in my bones. We built our relationship deliberately, slowly. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what had been broken. 2 years later, he proposed on a quiet weekend away. No audience, no pressure, just a simple question and a ring he'd chosen carefully, thoughtfully, like everything else he did. I said yes, without hesitation. My father walked me down the aisle. That wasn't something I'd planned when I was younger, but life rarely looks the way you imagine it will. My mother and brother weren't invited. They weren't told. That chapter of my life had closed, and I refused to reopen it out of obligation or guilt. We built a home far from where I'd grown up. A different neighborhood, different memories, a clean slate. When we had children, twin girls, Lena and Rose, something inside me shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Holding them for the first time, I felt a fierce clarity. Love wasn't about protection at all costs. It was about guidance, about teaching accountability, about preparing them for a world that wouldn't bend just because you were scared. I promised myself I would never teach them that someone else should pay for their mistakes. I never spoke about my mother or brother when they were young, not because I was ashamed, but because they didn't need that weight. One day I would tell them the truth, but not until they were old enough to understand nuance, consequences, choice. In the meantime, they knew one thing for certain. Their mother stood up for what was right. My work with the wrongful accusation organization grew. What started as volunteer phone calls turned into speaking engagements, fundraisers, mentorship. I met people whose stories mirrored mine in devastating ways. Siblings who lied, parents who chose favorites, systems that rewarded silence over truth. One woman, Teresa, had been accused of embezzlement by her own sister. She'd spent 2 years fighting charges before being cleared. "How do you move on?" she asked me once, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "How do you let go of the anger?" I thought about that for a long time before answering. "I don't think you ever fully let it go," I said. "But you can decide it doesn't get to decide who you become." She nodded, slowly, like someone hearing permission they'd been waiting for. On the 5th anniversary of my acquittal, Rachel called me. "I thought you'd want to know," she said gently. Daniel was arrested again. My heart sank, not with fear, but with sadness. "DUI," she continued. "3rd offense." I closed my eyes. He was looking at serious time. After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen long after the house went quiet. I didn't grieve for the man he was. I grieved for the man he could have been if my mother had taught him responsibility instead of entitlement. Protecting him hadn't saved him. It had ruined him. A few months later, I received a letter from my mother. Short, direct. "I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. I have 6 months. I'd like to see you." I held that letter for a long time. Part of me felt pity. Another part felt nothing at all. In the end, I wrote back, "I hope you find peace, but I can't give you absolution. That's something you'll have to face on your own." I never heard from her again. I don't know if she died angry, or regretful, or convinced she'd done the right thing. And I realized something important. I didn't need to know. People ask me sometimes if I forgave her. The answer is no, and I'm okay with that. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. It's a choice. And sometimes it's a choice that asks too much from the person who was hurt. I healed by building a life grounded in truth, by choosing integrity, by surrounding myself with people who didn't ask me to bleed quietly for their comfort. Patricia and I stayed in touch over the years, coffee dates, long conversations. 2 people connected by something terrible who chose not to let it define us. When she told me she was getting married, I cried. "You fought for the truth," she told me once. "Not everyone would have done that." "I had to," I replied. "The alternative was losing myself." Now when I look at my daughters, confident, curious, unafraid to speak up, I know I made the right choice. I chose truth over approval, integrity over silence, and myself over a version of love that demanded my destruction. Some betrayals are unforgivable, but that doesn't mean they get to end your story. Sometimes they're the reason you finally start writing it for yourself.